from unceded Aboriginal land. We recognise and pay respect to the elders and communities that have met on this land and that have shared knowledge and worked together to find points of connection and solutions, and from whom we continue to learn and to try and walk in terms of those enormously important traditions. We pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge how strongly these forms of leadership continue to guide us as we confront the challenges that face us in the world today. So it's my happy job to welcome you on behalf of the Sydney Health Ethics Network to be able to learn from my very valued colleague from York University, which, contrary to a lot of people's assumptions, is not in England, but instead in Toronto. Today's event is all about helping to build a community of practice in co-design methods and methodologies in the university, particularly across Faculty of Medicine and Health and Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, but that's only a sort of outcome of where we happen to have started. So just out of interest, who here is from FMH? Just in the room, hands up. Okay, who's from FAS? And who's from elsewhere? Neither of those two things. Yeah, awesome and welcome. And online, I know you'll be joining us from a whole variety of different disciplinary perspectives. So a lot of the time, one of the very simple aims of a workshop like this is just to know who each other really are, and maybe find a few people that you feel like it would be okay to ask a question of in the future if you were thinking through something or trying to work out an answer to a question in a project, or wondering if there's a champion who might feel a little bit more knowledgeable than you and who can validate the solutions that I know you yourselves will come up to the many complexities involved in doing co-design work. And it's also our opportunity to learn from somebody who's had a lot of experience in utilising these sorts of methodologies. And I hope you do get to stay around online or in the room, if not for the drinks and nibbles, although love it if you can join us for those, at least to be able to find out how to connect to the Sydney Health Ethics Network and to the Community of Practice in Co-Design. And there'll be a little announcement about how to do that. There's some more infrastructure to help us with that task at the end of this event. How will it run? This event is going to have start off with a few little warm-up speed dating exercises, so we start to build that knowledge of who each other are in this room. Then there is a brief opportunity for Sarah to share some of her ways of working and how she's overcome some of the challenges that I'm sure we'll recognise and face, but most importantly, for you to ask your questions. And remember, we've titled this "You Can't Ask That," in the spirit of the ABC show of that name, meaning that there are no questions. Oh, thank you. There are no questions too foolish to ask or too basic to ask. Do please come in and join us. There's seats more on this side of the room, but please feel welcome at any table, and we can find more chairs if we need to. Bit of housekeeping. Please don't take photographs. What stays in this room is going to remain in this room. If you need to use the bathroom, it's directly across the giant foyer, kind of just that way compared to the cafe. It's obviously a direction for people in the room. In the event of any emergency, we'll be leaving via the main doors there and gathering outside the building. If you have any other questions, or if you have any needs, or if you have something that needs accommodation that we can support, please come and see any of us. We're very grateful to be joined by Juliet and Jess and Lisa on the Zoom, so questions can go through to them as well. So I'm going to kick off by inviting my very, very dearly valued colleague, Professor Amanda Tattersall to lead us in a little speed dating event. In fact, I hope I get to join in. She'll give you the rules of engagement and start us all off getting warm. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Claire. Look, I've got a mobile one so I can walk around. So just to introduce myself, my name is Amanda Tattersall. I'm an associate professor, although I do appreciate the promotion that Claire has just granted. And I'm based in two places. I'm based in the School of Geosciences, which is geography, and also at the Sydney Policy Lab. And my work at the Policy Lab is to lead what is our method work, which is community-led research. So I come to the university slightly oddly or remarkably, depending on your turn of phrase. I spent most of my life in the world outside the university as a community organizer, as a social change maker. And I have found in my time at the university for the last 7 years that the practices of community organising, which is focused on relationships, power and uncertainty, and working with communities to create knowledge, are particularly appropriate and useful when it comes to doing community-led work. And so my work at the Policy Lab that spans issues like climate change to mental health looks at questions of how we can involve communities in the development of research questions, the winning of grants, the collection of data, the analysis of data, and the not just the authorship of data, but then the achievement of the policy impacts that we wrote about in the first place. So I'm a huge fan of the work that Sarah is going to be talking about and delighted to have her here. And also, along with a team of people in this room, Lisa, Jess, others who couldn't be here today have helped set up this community of practice around co-design that we're going to talk a little bit about later. For those of you who have put dots on your thing that make you interested in knowing more, there's a space where we can work together to learn more. So before I get into the, I hate the phrase, the idea that we're going to do speed dating, but you're probably going to feel like it is. We're going to get to know some other people in the room. But before we do that, I just wanted to, there's lots of ways you could set up a space like this to frame rules of engagement. Basically, they're normally about just be a nice person, don't be an asshole, so I'll assume that that's going to be taken as taken for granted. The only rule of engagement that I want to put out there is this rule that I quite like that I learned from the climate movement. I'm going to focus here. The rule of, hello, people on Zoom, is this the idea of step up, step back. Has anyone heard of this before? Okay, so work with me. If you're the kind of person who is super confident at talking, like that's like me at a table, I'm like we encourage you in this space, don't not talk, right? Say thoughts, but also be conscious that you might need to step back at times to create space for others. If, on the other hand, you're the kind of person who's not super, whatever it is, wanting to get into a conversation, because for whatever reason, we encourage you in this space to step up. Right, so we want to create a space where people get in with their thoughts. This Chatham House rules. It's a pretty safe space. We'd love you to get into the conversation, irrespective of who you are, and create space for each other. Am I still doing the wrong thing? Oh no, this is okay. Come in. Look, there's a seat right here. How fun for you! You get to walk all the way across. Well done. Hi. See, she's like me, right? So we're going to do this exercise of getting to know one another a little better. As Claire identified, like there's a bunch of people here from the Faculty of Medicine and Health. Awesome. There's also plenty of people here who are not. Sometimes, we have a habit in the university to sort of hang out with the people who are close to us and we don't get to know others. Is that in any way familiar? Or is that just me over in science? We feel like we don't connect to enough people. Anyone here feel like they have enough lawyers who are friends, science people who are friends, architects who are friends? Okay, so one person's really connected, but everyone else, I think there is a tendency, like we've got so much on and so much activity that sometimes we don't feel like we have time to connect to others. We've created some time. We're going to have an opportunity for 3 5-minute conversations. And what's going to happen, don't do it yet. I'm giving out the instructions first. You're going to get up. You're going to walk around the room and you're going to find someone who you're curious about. There probably are people in the room that you might have seen before at things. We're only having 2. We've talked too long already. 2, I've shut down your ability to connect to people. I apologize. What we're going to, let me give you some pointers for conversations that you could have, Don't just talk about what you do. You can do that. We do that all the time. Oh, hi, I'm an expert in blah, 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 right? Think less like that and more like why you do it in the first place. What's something that you find that shows who you are in the work that you do? Tell a story that relates to who you are, not just this objective subject that you research. Does that make sense? For some of you, you'll find that easy. For others, you'll be going, oh, I don't know what to say. I encourage you to have that gentle conversation with one another. What we're going to do, you'll spend some time at your table. So why don't you talk to others in the room? We're going to probably hit on a microphone awkwardly because I don't think we have a bell. But what we're going to do is at 5 minutes, I'm going to give you a bit to find a person, right? So you get up and that's your job, finding a person. And then, or don't get up because not everyone can get up, but find a person. And I'll go ding, 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 ding. We'll try to at 5 minutes. And then you'll find another person and then you'll sit down. Make sense? Pretty straightforward, yeah? Okay, find a person. Conversation number 1. You should close the room now. Yeah. They open a bit later. Okay. Okay.
Hello, everyone chatting. This is me interrupting your fantastic conversation again. I feel like I'm on the airplane giving instructions about the safety tips and no one is paying attention.
Okay. I'm going to invite you to return to your seats. Has anyone heard of this one where I stick my hand up and then if you see it, you stick your hand up and stop talking? I feel like I helped introduce that to this university. I will do that for future. So instead of me going like that, I'll just do this and you do that. The art of it though is you have to stop talking when you put your hand up. People have this sort of like put their hand up and keep talking. That's actually not following the rules. Okay, so how was that? So much energy from just having one-to-one conversations. It's almost like relationality is a really important tool that we can use in our work. I've got to stand in the middle, stop walking around. Okay, apologies. I can just walk like this and then this. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. I would encourage people to think about including an exercise as simple as that in anything that you do, because I think the more that we tend towards building new relationships between us, the stronger our capacity to do whatever we want to do is. So, you know, this is an exercise that you could use anywhere, including in your school or wherever you're working in the university. So I've got up on the screen. Oh no, but now it's been flicked. Oh, anyway, I did have on the screen briefly for those who are paying attention. Okay. You were all invited to pick a sticker on your way in. You had to either choose between whether you were a green for beginner in thinking about community-led co-design forms of research, blue for intermediate, and yellow for advanced. Who picked green? Does anyone want to share why they picked green? Why did you pick green? absolutely. I'm going to repeat back. So you know absolutely nothing about co-design. Bless you for your honesty, but you still came today. Why did you come? Excellent. Fangirl here. Fangirl. Yep. Yep. Great. There is nothing wrong you could ask today or normally, hopefully. But that's great. So does that idea of coming here, not knowing very much, but keen to learn more, resonate with other of the green sticker people? Okay. Yes, it does. Okay. Team blue. Who put down blue? The intermediates. Would anyone like to share why they put up blue? Oh, we've got the microphone. Oh, there we go.
I put blue because I have about 10 years of experience in community-based research in the HIV field in Canada. So I know Sarah's work quite well. Hi, although I don't think we've ever met in person. So
there you go, the power.
But so I'd say I'm yellow in that field.
Yeah.
But I'm green when it comes to working with people with disability. And that's a current community for me. And so I found myself in the middle.
Excellent. I love that there was deep reflection on the sticker collection process. You can tell that there's even people bringing their intellectual, like that's really thoughtful of you to be able, because it is different working with different communities of lived experience. I really feel like you are yellow, but you could identify as a blue if you want to. But thank you for sharing. So I'm imagining it's probably quite diverse in the blue community. That people, but the idea that people have had some experience with the tool, but still feel like there's a lot more to learn. What about the yellows, the arrogant yellows? I put down yellow. I'm an arrogant, confident yellow. Yeah. Would you? What?
Yeah, look,
What's your name? Sorry,
my name's Shane. Yes,
Shane.
I was reluctant to put the yellow on because it does seem presumptuous. But anyway, I think it's the driving force of the disability rights movement. Nothing about us without us, which is a slightly more aggressive way of saying co-design. So I've been working in the field trying to implement co-design, for a number of years now.
Yep. Nothing about us without us. And yeah, it's a huge part of, I'm doing this work in mental health, same kind of attitude, which is the work can't work without people affected by the conditions leading the research. How many other yellows were there? Okay, so it was you and me, mate. That's all right. And Sarah, hopefully. Otherwise, why the hell are we here? Okay, so look, the aim is for all of us to be able to strengthen our knowledge. There's lots of pre-existing knowledge in the room. The reason why I ask people to put their hands up is that it's not just like the expertise is out the front. Community-led research is based on the idea that there's expertise and knowledge diffuse within every community, and that actually in terms of improving and strengthening our capacity to become better at this kind of work, that knowledge and expertise is here as well. So thinking about your tables and beyond that actually, think of us as a spider's web, not a spoken wheel in terms of how we can learn and strengthen our practice together. There's a lot of expertise here, modest expertise included, and we can turn to each other to be able to strengthen our capacity. And that's what the community of practice at the university is about as well. But it's also what we're about today. So I'm going to hand over to Claire to now get us into the core reason why people are here.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Actually, I'll use this one. Thank you so much, Amanda. And look, thank you to Lisa for handling the clicker too. Look, my job now is simply to introduce Professor Sarah Flicker. So Sarah, do come on up. And you can fill in lots of your distinguished bio, which did go out a little bit on the Zoom and in the hyperlinks that I set out. But Sarah is, as stated, Research Chair in Community-Based Participatory Research. In fact, when I think about Sarah, the words community-based participatory action research is the chief label that comes to mind. And that's what you've been doing really from the beginning. So welcome. I'm just going to hand it to you now.
Thank you.
Do you want the clicker?
Yes, please. Okay.
You stand in front of the lectern, you don't have to use this.
Okay.
Oh, look. Okay. Hi, everybody. First, I just want to say it is such a treat to be here. And a big thank you to Claire for inviting me out, and for Amanda for setting this up so beautifully, and for all the wonderful staff who have made this event possible, and to all of you for coming. What an amazing group of people. I only got to talk to a few people at the very beginning, but I already love this room and this community. It's like an amazing, wonderful resource for you all, and for me too, I hope, moving into the future. So when Claire invited me to come talk today, she said, can you please come and share some great principles for how you think about doing this work, and some advice you would share for folks who might be wanting to get started. And I was very humbled by this invitation. And I actually spent a ridiculous amount of time thinking about how to distill this down into like 5 principles. And so I don't want to pretend that these are the be all and end all 5 principles. I'm just going to tell you some stories, and hopefully that will inspire some questions and some conversation, and we can kind of muddle through this a bit together. So a little bit about me, as Clara shared, I am a professor in a faculty of environmental and urban change. It's a really unique space in Canada because our faculty looks at physical environments, social environments, and political environments all under one roof. So we have geographers and political economists and activist researchers and urban planners all in one space, and we get to collaborate and dream big. And it has been just a really lovely and generative space. It's kind of known as this hippie school, a very unique space. We don't have grades, for instance, for our students. We give qualitative feedback, and we used to take them all camping until we all got bed bugs, but like, you get the idea of the kind of space that I have come up in. And I have this really amazing university who has supported me with a research chair in community-based participatory research. This is all amazing because people are always asking me, what are you doing in environmental studies? Because my background is all in health. So I have an undergrad in medical anthropology, a very epidemiology kind of conventional degree from UC Berkeley and all epi and biostats, and then a public health PhD. So the trip over to environmental studies was a really interesting one, and was a really great one because I like to look at what are the environments that create optimal opportunities for health. Because as we all know, so much about health is not about our individual behaviors, but about the environments that we are in that shape health and wellness and well-being. The other funny thing is all of my research is in sexual and reproductive health, like 90% of it. That's what I do. I talk with young people about their sex lives, their romantic lives. I do a lot of work around gender-based violence prevention, and I've been in the HIV space for a very, very long time. That's where I grew up. So I share that because my work is best known for my methods, not my content. And because the way I do this work from the beginning has always been about co-design. It's always been about putting youth voice first and finding ways to engage youth, particularly those youth who are labeled as marginalized or at risk, or there's all kinds of labels for kids who are having a tough time or who are given a tough time in life. And those are the kids that I love to work with. And I spend so much of my time kind of battling systems and institutions to make space for these kids to shine, that I often write about these experiences fueled by frustration. And it seems that those are the papers that get taken up most widely. So I'm known for my methods, but my passion is sexual and reproductive health. And that's how I came to this work. And I want to say that I am forever indebted for growing up and through the HIV movement, because the HIV movement is one of the most beautiful activist movements where the community and the university have really come together for a very long time to work together. It was one of the first sort of social movements that absolutely insisted, alongside the disability justice movements, around nothing about us without us. And in the HIV movement, it's called the principle of JIPA, the greater involvement of people with AIDS, or MIPA, the meaningful involvement. So not just greater, not just having people at the table, but really the meaningful involvement of folks. And when I started along this journey, I was a young person. And so this was a good lot of fun. I got to hang out with other young people and we muddled through our research together. And so my dissertation was done right away in collaboration with a group of young HIV activists. As I got older, it became more and more important to me, those principles, but also the work got harder because I was no longer a peer. And so I had to think about my own relationality in relation to the young people in terms of really holding on to those principles and continuing to center the young people most impacted as my career kind of evolved. So that's a bit about me and who I am and how I've come to this work. So I've been asked to think about principles. Oh, I didn't, well, there you go. Other things about me. I like to hike and bike and swim. I've got a dog. I've got some kids. I'm a full person too. Okay. So principles of co-design that I have learned along the way. I was asked to come up with 5. I slipped. I've got 6 for you. So I'm going to tell you some stories about these. So just as a little caveat, they're all going to sound really simple. You're going to be like, why did you put that on a slide? And they are, and that's because I really do believe that a lot of the most basic fundamental principles of co-design and of working with communities are just common sense, logic, and being a thoughtful, kind, engaged human. So I don't think there's like rocket science here of like, I'm going to tell you the secrets and you're going to be great at this after. I think you all know a lot of the things already, and I'm just going to tell you some stories that illustrate some of these principles. So don't be shocked if it's not like super brilliant up on the screen. Okay, here we go. So the first principle I want to talk about is finding the right people and partners. And you see here, I have a little picture of a wedding. That's my brother's wedding. He recently got married. I had the picture easily accessible. Why am I showing you pictures of a marriage? Well, I'm showing you pictures of a marriage because a lot of times, and I'll use my own example in particular, my research partnerships have lasted longer than most marriages. When I get in bed with you, I'm like in it. I'm really in it. And I use a lot of analogies about like sex and marriage because that's what I do. But also once I commit, like I really commit. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story of collaborating with the Native Youth Sexual Health Network in Canada. So the Native Youth Sexual Health Network is a very grassroots organization comprised of Indigenous youth leaders who are interested in sexual and reproductive health. And I first met the executive director of the Native Youth Sexual Health Network, who was 16 at a conference in 2006. We happened to be sitting next to each other at this conference, and we started chatting. And we have been working together for the last 20 years. And we keep writing grants together. And over the years, we've garnered 6 large national grants worth about $6 million. And despite their real initial hesitance, fear, reluctance to think about research, particularly collaborating with a white settler researcher, we have very slowly, carefully, and deliberately built a partnership that has sustained this organization for 20 years. And what this means is because of the research infrastructure and funding within the organization, this sort of grassroots organization has been able to hire core staff with sustained funding, and not only hire staff, but hire staff and be able to provide meaningful salaries and meaningful benefits. So much so that 20 years later, it is now part of their mission of the organization to be doing research. And through our collaborations over the years, we've also trained a bunch of their youth leaders. Like 20 years is a long time, so you can see this kind of change. But many of the youth who we started working with 20 years ago are now doctors, professors, professionals in their own right. And our most recent collaboration, and I couldn't be prouder of this, I am not the principal investigator. I get to be a co-investigator. And the youth that we trained 20 years ago, who did her master's and PhD, is now a professor. She's the PI on that grant. And so I have beautifully, thank you, written myself out of a job on that front. But I'm still involved, I'm still engaged. And I say this because it's a journey. And I think a lot of the time when we get involved in co-design, we've got to be really thinking about like how a commitment. And when I sort of partner with a community, particularly a community that's experienced a lot of disadvantage, I'm really in it to build the trust in the long term, not just with the people, but also with the organization. And I separate the two of them because I think so much of this work is about people and about that relationship. But of course, Jessica, who started the Native Youth Sexual Health Network as a teenager, is no longer a teenager, right? She's now in her late 30s. And so while we're still really good friends, she's not running the Native Youth Sexual Health Network anymore. They're new people and new executive directors. And so I think building those relationships with the organization and the humans is at the bedrock of kind of this work. Okay, so one quick question that we got early on in terms of like one of those great questions that Claire was harvesting from you all was, okay, but how do I start? How do I, like, it's great. Yeah, go find the right people. Good. Okay, yes. But how? Where does one find the people? Like, who are these people, these magical people, and how do we find them? And I think that is a really great question. Where do you start? How do you find who are the people, and who are the people to avoid? Because there are also always, like, as many great people out there, there are also a bunch of people who are really toxic and not great, and you wouldn't want to be in bed with them for 20 years. Like, you might want to ghost them, right? Like there's the people you want and the people you want. So how do you find the great people? It's a really important question to ask. And I think this is one of these questions where it's really a good idea to date a little bit and not just jump right in. I've got 12 minutes to go, I know, and I've got 6 principles. Okay, so I want to say here's something to think about, is dating is really important. It's really important to start small, to meet up, to spend lots of time building a relationship before you like totally jump into bed and into a relationship. And it's not always clear who the right people are going to be. So I think taking time to slowly build relationships before you commit to long-term partnerships is really great advice. And you got to be a little bit careful because communities they're not homogeneous, and there are often factions and political factions. And if you don't know the community really well, you don't necessarily know all of that stuff. So that's also something to think about, because very early on, I was doing work around HIV with HIV positive youth. And I didn't realize at the time the big differences between adolescents who acquired HIV in adolescence and adolescents who were perinatally infected and were born with HIV, and the ways that those two groups of young people were really not politically aligned. And there was a lot of blame and shame directed toward youth who had acquired HIV in adolescence versus those who were born with HIV. And so it required a lot of work to bring those two communities together, to sit at the same table, to realize, and it's not dissimilar from other kind of social movement work. So thinking about who you bring to the table, how you bring them to the table, and understanding those political alliances is super important for thinking about these things. Okay, principle number 2. Put your cards on the table. Okay, so what do I mean by this? I think a lot of the time we have these romantic visions of we're all going to come do this work together because we all have the same end goal. And we all want to be in the same place at the end. And we have these sort of like, we read these papers where everything goes super well and everybody's aligned and it's like very romantic and lovely. And nobody ever writes about the bumpy journeys and the complicated stuff. But we also all know people who have told us over experience that it is not always a easy path, that there are lots of bumps on the road. And I have found over the years that being really clear and transparent about roles and responsibilities and accountabilities upfront is really helpful. Think prenup, to go back to our earlier analogy, right? So the clearer we can be about each other's priorities, the easier it is to project manage and ensure that sometimes competing demands get triaged. And so some really concrete examples of this are thinking about, what do people like to do? What are their talents? What skills do they want to get out of this? What needs do they have? For instance, if you're in a department where you need to publish a certain amount, be transparent about that. If you are in a community organization where you need to have a certain amount of visibility, or you need a certain amount of media hits, or whatever it is you need to maintain your integrity and feel good about the process, it's really helpful to have those conversations up front and be super clear about them so that needs can get met. And I'll give you a really concrete example of this. In almost all of my projects, we make a commitment that we are going to put out a community output before we put out an academic output. So for every academic paper we write, we promise that there will be a video or a press release or a community report or something that's accessible that goes out to youth first before we do the academic work. And this is part of our commitment for making sure that a knowledge translation plan really fits the needs of everyone involved. So we kind of go back and forth between those issues. And I have found in general that doing the work of translating knowledge into community accessible formats makes my academic work that much stronger, because we've done so much of the work. And in terms of co-design, particularly in the areas I work in, youth are so much better positioned to take the lead on those kinds of outputs. And through taking the lead on those outputs, I'm able to really hear what are their arguments and use those arguments in our academic work, and then give them the authorship because they've already articulated. And having those shared authorship on all of our work in collaboration is really important to me as well. So thinking about knowledge translation, thinking about attribution, and thinking about the end goals at the beginning. And the last thing I'm going to say on this point is inviting you to consider how you will handle conflict, differences of opinion, and distress up front. So rather than thinking these are to be avoided, discomfort is to be avoided, I actually see it as a sign of a very healthy relationship when people can come to the table and fight it out together and stay, right? Once people sort of feel like they cannot disagree, we're in big trouble, because the whole point of bringing all these diverse viewpoints to a table is to attend to that diversity and find where are the areas of commonality and how can we work through them together. And the healthiest partnerships I'm in are ones where people feel okay about disagreeing. So thinking about how you want to handle conflict upfront and building that into governance, key. Okay, next principle, here we go. Nope, wrong one. Sorry about that. Okay, not changing. Okay, third, oh no, I missed 3. Back. Budgets, okay. Budgets are important. Now I know you're like, oh, real rocket science there, Sarah. Thanks for that one. But I want to spend a minute talking about money and talking about compensation. I believe it is very important to pay people for their work. Say it with me. I believe it is very important to pay people for their work. Thank you. Okay. Why am I harping on this? Because this takes up so much of my time. This takes up like a ridiculous amount of my time, because at least at my university, I have 3 options for paying people. I can either employ them and put them on a contract, like payroll. I can hire them as consultants, or I can treat them as research participants. None of these models are great for co-design. They all are problematic. They all have different tax implications. They all have different assumptions around, do people have tax numbers? Do people have fixed addresses? Do people have bank accounts? Institutions, at least mine, are really based on this very normative model of like who people are and how they're going to get paid that don't jive necessarily with many of the youth I work with. And I see so much of my time is spent trying to navigate the institutional barriers to make space for different ways of engagement and finding pathways to do this where I can transfer funds. And I think it is so important to build this infrastructure and realization in, because I would recommend no one go near co-design unless they have the budget to pay people, feed them, and make sure that they can get physically to and from a space. And I know that sounds so basic, and forgive me for those of you who are like I forget what colors, yellow and green, but I just needed to say it because I think it's so important. That being said, you would not believe what you could do with $5,000. You don't need giant pots of money to do this. Even a tiny bit of money can go a very long way toward doing really magical work. And the last point I want to make on this slide is that I have become very creative about using my teaching to forward community agendas. So I now teach a course every year. It's called Participatory Research Methods. And every year I work with an NGO that approaches me that says, I have this research problem. Can you help us? And I spend the whole semester with my students working in and with and through the community organization. And so we are able to be very creative about things like that would normally cost a lot of money through student learning opportunities. So I think you can be super creative about this as institutions. Okay, next, number 4. Yeah, absolutely. Claire's like, and you're out of time. Okay, so here we go. Number 4 is make space for peer leadership. And again, I know it sounds really basic, but not just make space, but hold on to and protect that space. So thinking about how can you lead from behind? How can you just bring people into a room and give them the opportunity to try out new things, to build their skill sets, to practice what it is they want to practice? And I would say that in an ideal scenario, by the time a meeting happens, I am not at the front of the room. I am at the back of the room, and we have worked with young people to lead so that they can run the show. I have found that 90% of my work happens outside of a public meeting. 90% of my work is working one-on-one with youth leaders so that they can lead in their own communities. And that by the time there's like a public event, they're shining. And then I know I've done a great job. So, and then the other like big piece of advice and thinking is then my job too is once they're leading is to remind folks to step back, in Amanda's language, and let them do their thing. So kind of holding on to that youth leadership model is really key. Okay, next up for my principles is the process is an outcome. So a lot of times thinking about are we process oriented? Are we outcome oriented? For me, co-design, they are inseparable. The process is meant to be a transformational process for everybody involved. And when people kind of can come through it on the other end and be really proud of the work they have done, I know that regardless of the outcomes we are fighting for, we've done our job. Because 20 years from now, those young people are in positions where they are able to see the possibilities of doing work differently. So for those of us in the academy where we're constantly feeling pressures to have outcomes, I would suggest a really nice opportunity is to write about your process. Become known for your methods. And that can be a way to ensure that you're still getting the kind of markers you might need for your academic institutions, but also leaving space for those processes. And the last point I'm going to make is facilitation is an art. Be creative in your approach. And this is as someone who is trained as a statistician and an epidemiologist who now does almost exclusively arts-based research using film, photography, video, mural making, sewing, quilting, and using these as key parts of the methodologies and the way I work with young people. I can tell you that opening up the possibilities of how we engage with communities and finding what are they excited to use, what are young people excited to be experimenting with, dabbling with, how can we use hip hop, social media, all the things that they're talking about as part of our research practice gives us a whole new opening into their world. So I want to encourage you to be methodologically adventurous, take some risks, and have a great time while you're doing it.
The whirlwind tour. At this point in time, we had been going to get Sarah to answer the questions that some of you fabulous people submitted anonymously, but we'd rather you got time to talk to each other. So Sarah, I'm springing this on you, but we might do a Zoom later and record it, and you can answer those questions on Zoom. So the answers will come anyway, but they won't get in the road of you guys talking to each other now. Amanda will lead us.
Look at this, it's iterative design, you know, it's community-led, beautiful. So what we're going to do now is have time at tables. And we're going to ask you to do two things. They're going to have 15 minutes, so quite a proper amount of time to talk about to introduce yourself to each other, because you probably didn't talk to each other previously, and just get a sense of people at the table. Think about what you're doing and what Sarah's 6 lessons and stories might have given you as fuel for the fire for the work that you're doing. And then, so give yourself at least, I would suggest 5 minutes for this last bit. We're inviting you to co-design a question from your table to the center. So that doesn't mean one person gets to come up with a question and everyone else goes, oh, right. It means genuinely, like, what is something that is a shared challenge that you have across your table as a community that you would like to ask Sarah? Not everyone's going to get a chance because we only have a limited time for a Q&A at the end, but there will be time for probably maybe about 4 or 5 questions to be asked. Okay, clear? Great, you've got 15 minutes. Thank you.
Yay, it works. Amanda, you were right. This is the bit where we feel terrible because we have to ask you to pause your conversations, even though it's so wonderful to hear them. Okay, can you all put your hands down? So this is the bit where, Sarah, we need you back up here because hopefully this mic works too, right? Yeah. Have whichever mic you like, and we're going to just ask what you tables have come up with. And I think I might just, first of all, is there any table that has a question that they just really, really, really want to ask? So anybody come up with something they're really desperate to have it be asked? Excellent. I'm going to give you this microphone.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was pretty dominant here, so I apologize. This is probably more from me than my table mates. I was super interested in, I guess, how you go through ethics for things like this. I've just gone through 6 to 8 months of grueling back and forth with my ethics committee. I've been particularly working with a remote Indigenous community from far north Queensland. And the ethics committee were forcing me towards really defining outcome and method up front. And we actually, in the end, tried to essentially hack the system a little bit by making the co-design the object of study rather than kind of what the outcome was that we originally wanted to study. And I just wondered whether you had any thoughts or input, or if anyone else in the room has gone through a similar kind of traumatizing experience that wanted to share with me afterwards.
Hands up for traumatizing experiences. With ethics, yes.
I mean, it's, yes, like I feel your pain deeply and truly and have been through it. What's nice is I think I have now developed a relationship with my ethics review committee in the same way that, and so I have a couple of thoughts on this, and none of them are great, but I'll give you some of what I have moved forward with in terms of thinking about ethics. So number one is I've written a lot about ethics. So and they've all been like published papers that I can cite in my own ethics reviews, and they've gotten a lot of attention. And so I've written these papers out of fury. Like I will tell you that before I wrote those papers, it was like a lot of back and forth, but having written them now, I lean on them hard with my ethics review, because, you know, when they're published in places like the Journal of Adolescent Health, you know, like big journals, you can sort of say, look, this is now practice. And here's why parental consent is inappropriate when working with, sexual assault survivors, for instance. Like, it doesn't make sense. And I've laid out the argument, and so that's one. The other is I now do a lot of pre-work. So I will call the ethics before I submit, and we will go back and forth orally. And so that by the time I submit, I know that I have prepped them for what is to come. And that has helped a lot. And I do the same with the Indigenous communities that I work with. So at least in Canada, you have to go through ethics in the community, through tribal councils, and at the university. And so I have found that it is far less frustrating to do a lot of the consultations around thinking about ethics before. And then, so by the time the package goes in, it's a much more smooth sailing situation than before. So those are like, and then the third piece is I've done a lot of thinking about, because I do a lot of arts-based work, challenging around things like anonymity and confidentiality, because folks want to be named. And so really finding different norms. So working with colleagues who do documentaries, or working with colleagues who are in journalism, and saying, like, how are you pushing back against these norms and building that into the case. So yes, it's frustrating, but I think spending a lot more time upfront rather than the back and forth has been one. You did that and it still didn't work, then I'm just sorry. Yeah. The other thing I've tried doing is like pointing to other examples, like published stuff that's like, well, no, this, this is now a standard of practice, and sometimes that can help too. But
We followed the IATSIS, which is kind of I can't remember the acronym, which is really bad because I'm got a little stage fright, which is the best practice guidelines for working with Indigenous communities within Australia. And we went through that and did a series of consultation, and even had the corporation who administers and manages native title for the community co-sign a research agreement with us that kind of acknowledged that this had been done, and it still was a painful experience. It was more around the method than anything else, to be honest. They wanted the method defined upfront and why that was an ethical method. So we made the co-design of the method part of the research questions.
We might see if there's also people online asking those questions, or are they different or similar question? We'll take one from online too.
Thank you. They're different. So each group on Zoom also co-designed a question for you. And I'm mindful we've got about 10 minutes or so. I'd like to get through quite a few more. So I'll take two from Zoom, and then we'll do another one in the room again. I've first got Louise, and then I've got Sonali. So Louise, you can take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Great. Thank you so much. So the kind of broad question we came up with, and it is sort of related to the last question around ethics, was why is it always a workaround to overcome the practical hurdles regarding implementing meaningful co-design? It never seems to be straightforward. So, payment or finding ways to include young people and consumers to be authors on presentations. And maybe that's too broad of a question. So perhaps then, and did you have any ideas for changing and challenging those sort of systems at institutions which would allow things to be not always a workaround and perhaps a bit more straightforward?
Those are such good questions. So, I mean, yes, but I will say, so currently at my institution, we are launching an Indigenous specific ethics review board. It's the first in Canada that lives in a university, and it's going to be governed by a different set of rules. It is so much work. It has taken so much work. So yes, I think institutions can move, but it does require that, those of us who, the problem is when you're very loud about your complaints, you get invited to the table to change things. So that's great. And I'm down for it and I'm there for it, but it has also been a crazy amount of work. And so I think, as someone who has spent a lot of my career kind of fighting this, I am now at the point in my career, which is lovely, where I get invited to the institutional tables to try to change things. And it is slow moving, but it is possible. The good news is it is possible, and we're making change. And we're also, the other place where we're making some change that I think is really exciting is at our National Granting Council. So I now sit on a committee for the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, which is the big body in Canada that gives money to health researchers, to actually change policies around how we review grants, who sits on the review committees, how we can make it inclusive, how we can get more community members on those, how we can get them compensated. So we're trying to change systems, but it's slow, but I think it's possible. Like it's very exciting to me. And the HIV community was the first place within our CIHR whole system where we were able to really make change, and provided a model that's now being taken up in Indigenous health and in mental health and in reproductive health. So
great. Thank you, Sarah. That's huge. Let's find those tables and get at them. Second question from Sonali. Sonali, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. Sorry, I don't think we really designed a question when we were chatting. We ended up chatting about the differences in consumer co-design in community-based trials, and then the difference with clinical trials and at what stage and the amount of involvement. And we ended up talking about inviting them to the advisory board and at protocol design, intervention design, and right through the delivery, and taking their suggestions on board and how we would do it. I suppose we shared our experiences, but and talked about remuneration a bit. I'm not sure if Damien, Gemma, you want to add to that. But we basically, I mean, it would be great to think through the differences in protocol or your advice on consumer involvement in clinical trials per se, how that might look different, or how.
I know I've heard a bit about it from a couple of other tables in the room, and it's maybe one where the power difference between who's in control and what it might mean to do real co-design has become particular. I can feel the tension there.
Yeah, I think we had a very similar question at our table as well. We were talking about it. I don't think there's a magic number or answer. A rule of thumb that I like to use is to try to have at least 2 youth for every adult in the room. So I think that could probably also apply to many other situations where there's safety in numbers. So I think the worst thing to do is bring one person to to represent the community with a table of an army of academics. But thinking about, if you really want meaningful consultation, how do you flip the power dynamic so that there's enough folks for people to feel safe to voice their opinions and not feel overshadowed by expertise. So that's it's just a quick rule that I try hard to follow when I'm inviting youth into spaces.
Have we got another question from in the room? I'm just going to note that it's a question coming from the Sydney Health Ethics Network lead, by whose auspices we get to have Sarah today. Thank you, Ainsley.
No pressure. Thank you, Claire, and hi, Sarah. So I'm Ainsley Newson. I've marked myself green and blue because I didn't want to appear cocky. But ultimately, this kind of arose out of the questions on our table. And I'd say one thing before I get too into this was, we all come from very different backgrounds, but there was a lot of synergies across our experiences and the types of things we talked about. And I think our question actually builds quite nicely on what you were just talking about with power dynamics. And I think it's the flip side of that, which is the challenge that can come with co-design around the resources that people who may not have traditionally had a seat at the table may not always have. And in the sense that it can be hard to find the time, particularly if you're caring for someone or have a condition yourself, to participate. And that brings with it perhaps a challenge where you might be hearing only a subset of voices, or you might be hearing the same voices over and again. And there are structural barriers to that, but also not all of the solutions that we might have may necessarily be able to ease those burdens that people have. So I'm interested, I guess, whether this is something you recognize, and if it is, what
solutions or ways of thinking about it you've come up with in your work? And I say I, but actually I mean our table. Sorry. Thank you to my fantastic table of discussants.
I think that is such a great question, and it's such a real question. And I think it's something anybody who does any kind of community work grapples with, right? There are always, I like to call them like the professional community members who show up to all the things and are very vocal, and they're amazing and they're wonderful to have, but they may or may not represent a much wider diversity of experience. So for one of the things I've really I've taken from COVID and the pandemic has been the realization that totally different people show up in person than online, and that different voices get heard. And so one of the things that I'm playing with a lot more is having multiple points of entry for consultation and for community feedback. And I've been really impressed with the different folks who are showing up online than the in-person. And also I have a brilliant PhD student, Sarah Switzer, who has written a ton on creative facilitation. And her whole thing is about finding creative points for participation and inviting people in to participate where they're at, and whether that means like you can get 3 minutes of their time or like 7 weeks, and trying to find ways to sort of democratize the input processes and make it really accessible at key points. So having, maybe a smaller group of people do more in-depth work, but then like checking that quickly with like a 2-minute social media survey, for instance, or like a wider Zoom meeting, or like send in a photograph about how you're feeling, trying to find really creative strategies for reaching wider audiences, or has been really helpful. And she also does this thing where she asks a friend to ask a friend, so using the wider networks of community folks has been really valuable. But it's such a good question.
We have a last question on Zoom, and then we'll head into wrap up, and I hope you'll stay around for chats with each other.
Thank you, Claire. So we're going to end up on Zoom. Helena, I'm going to shortly ask you to unmute, but before that, I want to bring in one more question, because there was a form in the invitation, and you were able to submit questions beforehand. Just to do justice to, I think, 10 or so people who did that. Thank you. I'm just going to answer one question that was submitted. The rest we'll do later. We'll get to it. It's a sensitive one. What do I do when my own knowledge and expertise is contradicted by lived experience that, I don't know what words to use, is maybe subjective or narrow? I feel condescending even raising this question, but lived experience can be so varied, and I'm mindful of certain experiences influencing co-design in a way that not everyone's experiences will. So that's one question. And then the second question, Helena, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, thank you. This is really interesting, and we had a really great talk in our breakout room. So one of the topics we kind of landed on was that there's this kind of disconnect between government and other funding agencies, even research funding agencies, in terms of there's like a lip service to community-led and participatory research, but often the structures and the timelines don't match that intent. And so our question was, how might we demonstrate the value of participatory approaches to government agencies or funders to help facilitate a better alignment between the intent and the necessary practices of co-design? That's it.
That's a good question. So I'm going to hit the first one first, the first question, which was around like what happens when there's a difference of opinion or a different like expertise, clashing expertise. And I think this goes back to my earlier point where I was like, expect the conflict, right? And just because someone says it doesn't mean it's a great idea, always, right? And just because you have one voice in a room who's very loud or very dominant doesn't mean it's like the way we have to go. And so I think part of the beauty and the messiness and the difficultness of co-design or working collaboratively in any kind of way is finding a way through having a disagreement in a way that leaves everyone still feeling respected at the end. Like, I got heard, I may not win, but I got heard. And I would sort of lean on that. So rather than invalidating someone's expertise or opinion, we can say, like, I hear you, and let's talk about that a little bit more, and work through it, rather than just sort of be like, okay, well, the group decides that you have a seat at the table too. You all have seats at the table. So rather than, leaning into a power struggle, I think it can be much more productive to try to figure out where those tensions are and how we can have a discussion about them. So it's a very pat answer to that question, but I do think that a lot of people fear conflict, and I think conflict is really healthy, and finding a way to get through it together is going to make your team stronger. The second question around how do we get governments to see the value of this? Oh my gosh, good luck when you sort that out. Like, let me know. I have so many examples too, where I have like gotten government contracts, and then, the community totally changes their mind, and I go back to the government funders and they're like, no. And so it's just like just no, exactly. It's just like, no. And then you have to decide, like, okay, how can is there any opportunity for creativity in reporting or budgeting or thinking about it, and or whether you want to keep the money or give it back, or like you have to make a whole bunch of ethical decisions with your. Personally, I have found, at least in Canada, research money is far more flexible than government money. And so I have much more strongly pursued research money because of that flexibility, rather than like public health funds, which are very restricted in where I am. So I think it's partly about like doing the advocacy with the funders, but also sometimes walking away from it, because what's the point if you're going to do something that doesn't do good? So I think it's always like a balancing act of finding the money, negotiating with the funders. But I will say, it seems to me anyway, that it's getting better. Like it's better than it was 20 years ago. And I think if we keep pushing, it will hopefully continue to get better. And the more examples we have to show, like, this is why we did it, this is how it works, and we've written about it, and we can show the evidence, the better we'll be in terms of continuing on. So.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, I've just got a few wrap up things, remembering that there is lunch outside, so we'd invite you to stick around and continue the conversation. One of the co-hosts for this event was the Community of Practice, the co-design workshop and Community of Practice that has formed at the university. It came out of some work that I'd been doing at the Sydney Policy Lab and some work that had been happening in the research portfolio, where we worked to convene 6 professors and associate professors in 6 faculties across the university, all doing co-design, all aware that we're probably not sharing our practices and strategies between the different disciplines enough, and all encountering similar challenges with ethics, with grants, with HR, with university processes that presume that we do research as experts on our own in our offices, instead of going out into the field and co-designing work with communities. And so that's been around for a while now. This is the second year that the project that piece of work has been going. I guess your email addresses, you registered for this, and we will respond back to you with information about this event, with an evaluation, with the recording, but we will also keep you up to date. Don't worry, it won't be spam, because we believe in relationships, not just email, but we will keep you up to date with events when they do occur. That space, several people have gone, gosh, how do we change university? Well, come to this space. This space is actively having a conversation about how to renegotiate how ethics works, about how to change how HR practices work for employing people as lived experience researchers. You are not the only ones having this problem just on this campus. We're trying to use community-led research practices to change how community-led research is done at the university. The way I explained it to Ben Eagleton was to go, we want to co-design how we want to do co-design, right? And it was, look, small steps. you know, small steps, but we'll only be able to do it if we do it together. So if you're interested in that bigger piece of work, and not everyone is, that is the space to gather. That space is going to be expanding. At the moment, we only do ad hoc events because this is all on the side of our work. But I know as a community-led researcher, to be able that stuff to be able to be advanced, we need to work together. That's the principles of the research that we do. That's going to be the principles of how we work at the university. Put up your hand if you were a blue or a yellow, or, you know, indicate if you're a blue or a yellow. For the greens in the room, look around your tables, keep your hands up and proud, blues, up and proud. Yellows, we know over here, right? These are your allies. If you've been in this room going, I really am interested, but I'm going to need someone to talk to, you can talk to your colleagues, right? So have a chat over lunch about how maybe you could get some more advice or some more tips from people in the room. We actually have a really powerful network of people who do this, and we can support each other in that work. Blues, sorry to put you on the spot. You're obviously in a position to say yes or no, I'm too busy, but we'd invite you to help build a community of people who are doing this kind of work at the university too. I'm now going to hand to Lisa, and then we're going to hand to Claire for 2 more quick wrap-ups, and then we'll be done.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for attending. So I'm just going to build on what Amanda just mentioned about this co-design community of practice. As Amanda said, we do some public events, but really what we're looking for are ways to connect even in between events. And so far, this kind of stuff has come off because a bunch of us from across faculties care about this, are passionate about this, see that there's appetite, and sort of form a little working group that every now and then comes together to organize these events. But also what we'd really like to do are things like set up a cross campus Yammer group so that we can constantly be in contact. Now, if you look at me, you'll see maybe what the situation is here. I'll be going on maternity leave soon. Somebody else who is really active in this is also going on maternity leave soon. And essentially, if you are here because you are interested in this space and you think, gosh, I don't have a lot of time, but I have a little bit of time to come to meetings every now and then and see what we might do together, we'd love to hear from you. You can email me at lisa.fennis@sydney.edu.au. So my name is Lisa, L-I-S-A, Fennis, F-E-N-N-I-S. We'll put that in the recap email. Or that, Policy Lab, that works too, which is where we are sort of based. Yeah, we would just really love to hear from you. Also, Claire will mention this, but there's a QR code to the evaluation. We've written this on Zoom already. If you have questions for Sarah that we haven't discussed because, you know, time, submit them either through the evaluation, and we will see what we can do in, you know, grabbing as much content out of Sarah while she's here and getting that back to you. So with that, Claire?
And that's really all I was going to say too. We didn't get to answer everybody's questions, but you know, the price of filling out the evaluation, you know, all our lives depend on filling out the evaluations. So thank you for all of those people who are dutifully holding up your phone and scanning that QR code and ticking the boxes for us. You can submit your question or email it to me or to the Sydney Health Ethics Network email, which is easy to find through the university, as well as joining the community of practice. If you're interested in ethics and you'd like to be part of the conversation around ethics, you can join the Sydney Health Ethics Network for free. You don't have to know anything about ethics to join. All that happens is you get an email on a not very frequent, even monthly basis, saying what kind of events we have on, and you're welcome to any of them. So questions for Sarah. Sarah and I can do a Zoom and we'll give you that resource later for questions that didn't get answered today. Community of practice, you know where to go. Policy.lab. Sydney Health Ethics, you know where to go. There's a Sydney Health Ethics Network membership you can just click to join. We hope that you will join us in a second. If you didn't get enough of Sarah, at 3 o'clock, she's giving a public talk here, co-badged with the Posh Institute for Aboriginal Health with 2 really amazing Aboriginal panelists to respond to her. That's more about the content of her research rather than the methods that we've taught. Well, it's methods oriented, but much more, it's a talk rather than a workshop. And tomorrow she's going to tell me on Zoom all about how she created a degree program in environmental justice and the arts. I really want to know how she did that and what's in it. And if you would like to listen along or ask her questions, you can hop onto that Zoom as well. Thanks so much to all of you for coming. Huge round of applause for the network admin team and for all the staff who made this happen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. They did it under really difficult circumstances. Please join us for drinks and nibbles and refreshments and conversation. Join.